deny this feeling. I feel a rush coming to my head. I love this vibe, feel so high, I'm reeling. It's like a fire burning through my chest. It's time to let it out. It's time to let it go.
Hi everybody, thank you for joining the Ethereal Pathways podcast. This is my little co-host Ariel, my little mini Dachshund Ariel, that wanted to say hi and show her beautiful face. Say hi. Say hi. Anyway, I wanted to go into a little bit about, I know I've gone into a little bit about my history in one of the earlier episodes, but I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about, it's been on my heart lately to do this, about my relationship with my mother and some things that I went through with her. Because not only do I think I needed to talk about it for my well-being, to maybe work through some things, because, just talking about it here on the podcast has really helped me learn to release a lot of, the pain and trauma. But also, for somebody else out there that may have a similar dynamic with their own mother, to know that, you're not alone, that these things happen for a reason. It's help us work through it and grow as a soul. And whether you believe this or not, we choose our soul lessons and the people and the dynamics before we incarnate into each life. I'm a firm believer in reincarnation at this point, and I have been for several years now. And we choose these lessons to help us grow as a soul and ascend as a soul, but not just that, but especially in this lifetime for me, during this, ascension process that we're all going through, it's also to help the collective of humanity to ascend, to work through the trauma, the collective trauma that we've allowed by giving our power away to people and others because of our inner child wounds and our ancestral wounds that we carry generation to generation. And when we begin to release those patterns and work through those things, it will help us all ascend collectively as well as individually. And so I believe that by talking about these things that have been in my heart to share, somebody needs to hear it. And also it's helping the collective as a whole, and it's helping me. So that's what I'm going to be going into today. Let me put her down. Anyway, so my relationship with my mother, I'm trying to remember what all I brought up in the previous episode. I really can't remember fully. It's been so many episodes ago. I think I'm on episode 23, 24, something like that. Right now. Actually, this is going to be episode 18, I think. So, yeah. And I was a little bit ahead of myself on that. So, my mother was a very wounded individual herself. She came from an abusive childhood. Her father was a truck driver, commercial truck driver. He would be gone a lot, and he would come home drunk and abusive, and I believe verbally abusive as well. My sister knows a little bit more about it because she spent more time growing up with our mother as we were separated as kids. And I did go into that in a little bit in my previous episode when I gave a little background about who I am. But what I remember was that she had told me that she was abused a lot as a child, physically, verbally, and so was her mother. And she actually became more in her masculine as a result of that, because she had to protect herself and her mother from him when he would get into these drunk rages and stuff. And so now I'm starting to see how that pattern is playing out through the ancestral line. With my brother, he gets in terrible rages, anger rages. My sister has been known to do that on occasion, me too. And that's something that I've been trying to work through, trying to figure out where it comes from, even as recently. And it doesn't happen as often now that I've been working through a lot of the healing and releasing, layer by layer. But it happened with me too, and I still struggle with it. And even recently, this relationship recently, that I pretty much, I don't want to say I destroyed it, but I did a good number on it, because of some of the woundings, and I was pushing them away, and in the process of doing that, I felt angry and was lashing out, trying to push them away purposely. And it's painful to see that. But until you go back and look and think about what happened with your parents, what was their history, it's not until you start digging into that and start seeing those patterns. And then you're like, okay, well, where does that come from? How can I heal that? And you start digging into it, asking yourself, the right questions. How does that make me feel as a child when I was growing up with that person? How does that make me feel? How did that make me feel? And I think it's funny I said that in present tense, because it's still affecting, me in the present at the moment, and I'm working through that. So I think that was more of an intuitive thing when I said that. It's looking into those things and digging into them, and I'm still doing that. It's hard to do that. My ego doesn't want to sit down and do it. I don't think anybody of us wants to do that. But until you do that, you're going to continue to attract people, places, and things that are going to reflect that back to you, that wounding back to you. And the pattern's going to continue until you uproot it and you heal it layer by layer, until you quit attracting those people, because you've worked through that and you're no longer triggered by it. And so I'm going through that process right now, and that's why I want to share about this. So my mother, because of that wounding, reflected that in her relationships. She was more masculine than feminine in her relationships. She would assume the control role in the relationship by being bossy and telling the men in her life that was with her romantically, what would happen, what they're going to do that day. She was literally assumed a masculine role. And I have seen now recently that that's what I was doing over the last year. I've seen this pattern more and more and more as I go through, my triggers, my things with these relationships of men in my life. I'm now seeing how I was perpetuating that role up until now. And now that I'm really seeing it more and more and more, I'm trying to dig into it and figure out why. Okay, so obviously there's an imbalance between my masculine and feminine, which is caused by a wound, a childhood wound, way back. And I'm still digging into that and trying to figure out how to heal that and where it originated from. But basically, I know at this point it came from my mother's ancestral wound, raised in that way. And I don't know what happened with her dad and her mom. I don't know beyond that what was going on in their parents' lives. I just know about my mom from what she told me. And there was also a wound of not like a lack of self-worth, lack of feeling worthy of having better in your life, someone better in your life, and you were just settling. So she settled for that relationship instead of getting out of it, my grandmother. And because I guess if that's what she felt, she needed the stability for the family, for the kids, to raise kids, for herself, and she put up with it, knowing that he was cheating with the neighbor down the street the entire time. He was abusive to her, and she knew about it, and she allowed it, just didn't talk about it. And so it's like crazy how I'm seeing, these things went on. And then, my mother got cheated on, and then all this other stuff happened. She was lashing out, angry all the time, controlling, manipulative, trying to protect herself, trying to protect her inner child, her little girl inside that was abused as a child and had received that abuse and went through that and had to protect herself, and as far as I know, never on this earthly plane fully worked through that to where she quit that pattern. And she reflected that back to us as our mother. It was her way or the highway. She was judge, jury, executioner. She was telling us, whatever she believed at the time, if we didn't believe the same thing and come live with her and basically support her financially, that we were going to go to hell. And she would call us whores and whoremongers. Excuse me, I hope YouTube doesn't ban that term, but it is something that physically was spoken to us. And for the sake of this video, for educational purposes, I'm sharing that. That's the terms that we were literally called by our mother over and over, in letters, over the phone, in person, when we would see her. And this toxic pattern just kept going. And it wasn't until I think my 30s where I really started to, right before the year I got pregnant with my daughters, when I cut her off finally. All of us, strangely, me and my siblings, all three cut her off out of our lives that year, like in the same year span, within a year of each other. And I thought that was crazy when I went back and talked about that and found out that's what we did unanimously. We didn't even talk to each other about it. It just happened. So it was like our souls knew that she was about to leave the earth plane. We didn't know. We found out years later that she had passed, about 5 years later that she had passed, 5 years prior. But we had detached from that, and it was hard. It was hard letting go of our mother, but we started seeing the cycle, because we did get together, the three of us kids, and we would talk about the cycle that we started to notice with our mother and how she would treat each of us. It was the same cycle over and over, where we would, come back from a no contact period where we cut her off, quit talking to her. It lasted around 6 months to a year, roughly, typically. She would initiate contact, and most of the time, I won't say all the time, but most of the time she would initiate contact again, and would just be all super sweet, say, hey, I'm just checking on you, hope you're okay, praying for you, things like that. Act all nice, super sweet, try to be open, things like that, to lure us in. It was like a lure. And usually we would fall for it. And we would, because we wanted that relationship with our mother. And I don't want to say we were dumb or anything like that. We're not dumb. We craved that loving, nurturing relationship with our mother. That's natural to crave that with your own mother. But we never had that relationship with our mother because we couldn't trust that that was going to be consistent. It was always, we would be sucked in. She would then, the next step of the cycle is she would start gathering information on us in our life. What's going on with you? In a nice, friendly, loving way, and get us to open up, to her about our lives, what's been going on, who we're dating, what our job is, and she would get us to open up for a few weeks and then gather information, gather intel, and gain our trust again. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's my dog playing with her toy behind me, if you hear something. She would gain our trust again and get us to open up to her. And then just when we started to think that things were, evolving, okay, well, maybe we can trust that maybe we can, rebuild this relationship, because she's apologized, would always apologize to us. I was wrong to do this, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, I hurt you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we were like trying to turn over a new leaf, and, every time this would go through like this cycle. And we didn't see it. We just didn't see it until our 30s. That's when we started really seeing the cycle and started comparing notes to each other. And we were like, yeah, there is a cycle there. And when we would go through this, it would always get to the next stage, would be, okay, she would start judging us for the information the intel that she got on us. She would start to say, well, baby, why are you doing that? Or, she'd start to judge that person that we were in a relationship with, or that job isn't serving you. And, she would start to try to control our lives in a way, start to judge our lives. And then when we would start to give her a little bit of pushback, and or would talk back and say no, like, we would kind of snap back, or we would push her away because she's hurting us. She's not being accepting. She's not, in a place where we can trust her now, because she's turning around and using it against us. The information she took that we opened up with open hearts to her and allowed her in, emotionally in our world, she then turned around and used it against us to judge us with, and would make us feel terrible about ourselves. And this is the cycle we went through. And then we would get mad. We would blow up at her. She would come back and would call us these names. And then she would send us, when emails became a thing in the 90s, she would send us pages of emails, right? All caps, all underlined and in bold, about and having scriptures, Bible scriptures, because we were raised Christian. She became what she called a born again Christian by TBN in Phoenix, Arizona, and ever since then she was speaking in tongues and believed. I do believe she had a gift, some psychic gifts, but she believed was speaking in tongues and things like that, and that she would get visions and dreams and messages for us, and that she would give them to us, through phone, whatever, emails. But most of the time, it was judgment to us in these emails and the phone messages, whatever. She would leave back-to-back phone voicemails. If we didn't answer the phone, she would call back until the voicemail filled up. It cut off. She'd call right back, do another one, and it would hang up. And she would do this 5 or 6 times sometimes in a row, until she got the word out that she needed to get out to us, the message from God or whatever it was that she needed to get off her chest. And then she would leave us alone for a little while. And then she would send us these long pages, like 20-page emails sometimes, 12-page. Like I said, all caps, all underlined in bold. And when she would handwrite us letters on legal paper, it would be a lot of underline. It would be, written on the sides all the way around. It was hard to follow, front and back of the pages. And yes, for those of you who didn't tune into that episode of Who I Am and Where I Come From, my mother was bipolar. She was clinically at one point diagnosed that way, but she didn't admit herself. She was tricked into it, she said, by my dad and his parents. They tricked her into, getting her admitted in a hospital against her will. And, that's just the story I remember being told. And they officially clinically diagnosed her with manic depressive, disorder, or bipolar was what they call it now. And they basically told her to take this lithium until your blood level gets at this, and then I'll sign release papers. And she said that the doctor told her he didn't think there was anything wrong with her. But that he just wanted to be done with it and move on, whatever. And that was her side of the story from what I remember. But that's something that we went through with her. It was this cycle, and we never really could. It was this trauma, over and over in this cycle, until we got tired of it. As adults, we started waking up to it. And like I said, we compared notes in our early 30s. And this is right before I got pregnant with my daughter. Was the year I cut her off. I think it was like January or February that year. I think it was January or something like that. Maybe even December. I'm the year before. I'm trying to remember, but it was around 2012, and that's the year I got pregnant with my daughter. She's about to turn 13, and I just remember all of us talking, and we're like, man, I don't think we're ever going to be able to have a normal relationship with her. And we just all kind of unanimously agreed at that. And we just decided to cut off communication. And then we never heard back from her, like we normally do after about 6 months to a year of cutting her off. And then we, messaged her, you heard from Mom? No, just here and there. Well, 5 years later, I found out inadvertently it's kind of a long story, that she had passed of some kind of cancer. We don't even know what kind of cancer she passed from. And it was a little bit sad. I did cry a little bit, but I felt really strange that I didn't cry more than I did. And now I feel like I'm understanding that, because I was anger towards her, from pain of the trauma, the continued trauma cycle over and over that she would inflict on us because of her own wounding. Now I realize that it was because of her own wounding she didn't learn to work through. And, that's a choice we have, either to look at ourselves or continue to point the finger at everybody else. And she was still in that wounded response of pointing the finger at everybody else and not looking at herself. Now, some would say that, well, that's a symptom of bipolar disorder. Well, if you're not taking your medication. I don't believe that that's entirely the case. I believe it's a spiritual thing. And if you're not looking at those ancestral wounds, you're not looking at the pattern, you're not going to see that. And you're not going to work on yourself and say, how can I stop this? How can I work on myself? And that takes, introspection. That takes owning up to your own, feeling sorry for what you've done to other people and feeling that pain, and then owning up to it and beginning to dig into why you're doing it and releasing the pain and the trauma from your childhood that it stems from, that's causing the triggering and the behavior. So a lot of people don't know how to work through that, especially back in that time. It wasn't widely a thing. I think that people really knew how to work through. Usually you had to have a counselor, a therapist of some kind to work through regularly, help you work through those things. And even a lot of them don't reach out to help. Back then it wasn't a normal thing to reach out to help for a counselor. It was seen as more of a weakness. And, people at that age, in that generation, didn't really do that as much. But my dad did. He was very big on counseling, and I'm glad that he got us in counseling even as children after the divorce between him and my mom, after the attempted kidnapping. I call it kidnapping because in my case, it felt like kidnapping because we had lived with our dad for at least a year or two by that time while she tried to come back and steal us away and take us across the country without consent. And, he had been given basically, guardianship at that point unofficially because she abandoned us as kids. Like, she just took off out of state. And, that wasn't cool. That hurt us. But it is what it is. I've had to learn how to work through that and begin releasing that and healing from it and, forgiving her for that. And it's a step-by-step process. Like I've said before, it's hard. You just got to do it layer by layer. And then I just felt like it was on my heart the last 2 or 3 weeks to share about my mother, my relationship with my mother. For some reason, I feel like somebody out there, and not just somebody else out there, I need it as well for my own healing, to get it out, to just talk about it, get it out, how painful it was. And it still is going through these triggers that I'm still working through in my current relationships that I have with people, and how difficult it is to come back from that and work through it. But it can be done. And it is being done. I see the growth that I'm making in my personal life with loving myself and forgiving myself, as well as my triggers are becoming less and less as I heal. I'm not getting triggered as much by the people that trigger me, like my ex-husband. I noticed in the last month and a half especially, the triggers have become almost non-existent. I'm surprised. I really started thinking about that this last week, how it has been at least 3 to 4 weeks since I've had a major trigger from a conversation with him. And I was like, wow, I didn't really think about that, but that's something that's happened. And that shows growth, because I'm not saying that it won't happen in the future, possibly, but it used to be. And even my recent guy friend that, we kind of had a falling out, and we're still working through it right now. But he even noticed it, the triggering, and how I was still working through forgiving him, and that I was still being triggered by things that he would say or how he would say it or whatever in the beginning of our friendship 3 months ago. And so I've seen myself grow since then in that regard, in forgiving my ex and learning to not be as triggered anymore, just let things go and forgive and move on. And so I'm proud of myself for that. I'm starting to see growth. And like I said, I'm not saying that it's completely gone, but it's been huge for me, because there was a period this last year where I almost couldn't get through one conversation with him without being triggered and pissed off and just cutting him off or hanging up on him. And that's huge for me, because that's stuff that it's really plagued me for a while. And, we were together a total of like 13 years. And, it was hard. 3 of those years we spent in different states. And I tried to get us back together, make it work for my daughter's sake. I went into that in previous videos. But, yeah, it was hard. A lot of that was learning, self-worth. I'm still learning self-worth. Self-love and that. What I'm worth, what I will not put up with, putting up healthier boundaries. Learning to recognize red flags earlier in a relationship in the beginning. Even during the love bubble phase, which I've recently gone through. And learning, am I going to use this as a trigger, or am I going to use this as an opportunity to grow and just say, this isn't a good fit, or what, and I'm still working on that right there in learning the difference between what am I running away from in relationships as far as avoidant behavior, and what's a red flag that I'm choosing to remove myself from because I see it as a red flag and it's not going to be good for me overall. And I don't want to be a part in it. You know what I mean? And so I need to learn. I know I'm still working on this. I'm starting to learn how to see it and start recognizing it and bring it up in conversations with that person. But I need to learn how to do it earlier in getting to know the person than I have been. And so I'm working through that right now. But I've seen the growth that I've made. And choosing a different way than what my mother chose is huge. Just choosing to be different and do things a different way that's what a generational curse breaker does, a cycle breaker. And that's, I know at least I'm here to do that. I've learned I'm here to do that on some of these patterns. Generational, like the lack mindset is another thing that I'm working through breaking. Again, these cycles are not easy to break. They don't happen overnight, but as you continue to work on yourself in your healing journey, it happens layer by layer. It happens, spiritual awakening by spiritual awakening. We go through multiple spiritual awakenings in our life, I believe. I know I have. And it takes that continual, consistent progress on yourself. Owning up to your mistakes. Owning up to, gosh, I did this wrong. I could have done this better, but now I see it. Let's figure out why I did that. Instead of just saying, oh, I forgive myself, move on. Let's look into why I'm doing it. Look into that root. Look into why are you doing that behavior. Because you're going to see it as a cycle and you're going to keep attracting it until you heal it and you figure out what's causing that. It's usually a wound from your past, your childhood, or a past, young adult relationship that caused you a wound somewhere, and you've got to release it and you've got to work through it and accept it. I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying, oh, I forget that person and move on. Really own up to it and look at yourself and look at your inner child and say, look, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel this way. Let's look at it. But just know I'm here and I'm now going to protect you, and I'm going to work to protect you. You're safe. You are safe. And tell your inner child you're safe now. And continue to do that consistently. Tell your inner child you're safe and visualize it in meditation, whatever. And just do that for yourself consistently, and eventually you'll start feeling more and more safe. You'll start noticing you'll react differently to these situations that used to react a certain way too. And I'm noticing it in my life. But that's pretty much the cycle that I wanted to go into about my mother. It got really ugly when I physically moved in with her when I was a young adult. And I moved in with her after the divorce of my first ex-husband. And I was about 20. Yeah, I think it was about 20, 21, somewhere around there. It was around 2001-ish, something like that. And I lived with her for 2.5 years in Pensacola, Florida. I moved from Georgia down to, Pensacola, Florida with her. And it was a spur of the moment move. It happened that day that I saw her up there in Athens, Georgia. And it was not planned. It was like a tower moment. Like, it was like it's out of nowhere, a move that day. And I just knew I needed a fresh start. I was, in a little low point in my life. I think I might have mentioned this before, that I had contemplated suicide not even weeks before she showed up. Probably 2 or 3 weeks before she showed up. I did. And I just felt lost. I felt scared. I had just lost my dad the year he gave me away in marriage in 98 to my first ex-husband. And he was my safety net. Again, I was explaining in previous episodes, I was coming from codependent background. And these cycles were in my family. And, I'm working to break that. And so when I lost him, I felt like I lost my safety. I lost my foundation. I lost, the person that made me feel the most safe in my life. And he always told me, if things don't work out, you always have a place here to come back to. And I always felt that was my safe place, my home. And then my home was uprooted from me and gone, just like that. And it kind of happened very quickly. And I didn't know how to adjust to that. I felt abandoned. Not like purposely from him, obviously, because, it was a medical condition, nothing he can handle, or it was nothing at fault for him, but I was just, I didn't know what I was going through. I was lost. And just feeling that abandoned by him. Not only abandoned by him, feeling abandoned by my mother from her taking off across the country and in a way abandoning us was huge. And then she died like that. And I guess in a way I felt abandoned by that too, even though that wasn't her fault to die, she just died, just like my dad. And so I really didn't realize that I had an abandonment wound. And, this is kind of like a new thing that's come up in the last, few years, is the abandonment wounds. And back then, even when I began working over 7 years ago, where my twin flame used to work, where I work now, my day job, it was like I was guided to a QHHT practitioner. I was guided to Dolores Cannon's stuff very strongly. And that was around, 2019? And I was guided to look for a practitioner in my area who was, I think, a level 1 or level 2. I think she was level 2 at that time. And one that I could afford, actually. And she was just taking donations. It wasn't like a set fee, but she would request a certain amount. But again, financially, I couldn't do but a certain amount. So I went through this, and that's when this, the past life regression, and that's when this abandonment wound reared its ugly head. And it literally came out very strongly in the session. I was crying I was talking to my parents, and I was crying to them, "You abandoned me." And I was crying, you left me, you abandoned me. And it wasn't until then that I realized that I had this sense of abandonment from them that was very deep. And I was like, what the heck? I did not expect that to come out. I just didn't. I was like, where did that come from? And then later years, the last, 5 years or so is when, 4 years really, is when I came across the abandonment wound stuff, and then the attachment style stuff the last 2-3 years. And that's when I really started working on myself to that level and understanding a little bit more about my triggering and my abandonment wounds and where they stem from. And I'm still working on digging into that now and trying to uproot them, from the root and, work through that. But that's pretty much what my background is with my mother. It was like a constant. When I lived with her, it was like a cult, just so you know. I know I was starting to go into that, and I forgot to go into that a little bit. when I lived with her, it was literally like a cult. She made me, convince me, very strongly, basically forced me in a way, manipulated me into, first of all, the first 2 weeks I was there, get rid of my truck that I was making payments on, which is a brand new truck. So I had to give it to the bank. It was charged off on my credit. Credit instantly took a huge hit because I sold it at auction. And then she made me, every yearbook I ever had, every picture I ever had from my past, she made me burn all of them myself. She made me burn all of them. Anything that was bought to me from my dad or my stepmom, she made me sell. Very valuable things like a cedar hope chest that my stepmom spent a lot of money on and bought it for me for a graduation present for high school. That had a lot of sentimental value to me. She made me sell it. Anything from my past. I was really into horses. I still really am attached to horses. I was born the year of the horse, Chinese astrology. Horses are a thing for me. I've very, very closely been attached to horses. I had a collection of Breyer horses. Some of you may or may not know what that is. It's a collectible horse. And there's some limited edition, collectibles that they put out every season or every year, whatever. And some of them are pretty valuable, and some of them were old. And I had traded some with, another fellow collector, and a couple of them were pretty old, and they were, a little bit valuable. And I had been collecting them since I was probably 12 years old, 13 years old, up until that point. So I had a little bit of a collection. She made me sell it for way less than what it was worth, just to get rid of it and get money. And you can take a guess what happened to the money. All of it. It went into the pool, the family pool. She didn't work, number one, the entire time I was living there. And before I moved there, she wasn't working. She could have worked, but she made excuses why she couldn't work. Her leg this, her leg that. There's plenty of jobs you could work where you're not on your feet all the time. So again, it was everybody else is doing her bidding. She felt like that was her place in the family. She was the high priestess of the family. She got direction from God for the family, and she would tell us all what to do. So again, it was in toxic masculinity. She was in her masculine too much. And was directing even her then husband, my stepdad, what to do and stuff. And she would basically control him and the family. And then I did all that stuff she wanted me to do. Again, I was a very broken, vulnerable person at that time. I was broken down. I almost committed suicide. So I was in a very vulnerable state. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was lost. I gave up. I literally said, I just need a new fresh start. And this was my answer to, this is a fresh start between me and my mother to try to see if we can build a healthier relationship, to have a fresh start and see what will happen. I can get a fresh start in my life and get away from all that old mess up in Georgia. I needed to get away from it, from the memories of my dad, whatever. I felt like in a way I was running away from it now that I look back at it. But it would all happen for a purpose. I needed to come down here and in order to meet the people that I needed to run into to help me grow on my journey and have my daughter. So it worked. It served its purpose in getting me down here. But she had me do all these things, and she controlled everything. I believe she controlled everything. Anything I said that she didn't agree with, she would condemn me for it. I was scared. I became very overly codependent because of it, because I felt like I couldn't say or do anything right. I was scared to say and do anything at that point, and I was over 21. I was almost 22. And then things became very toxic with we didn't go to our church, but we had our own church. We would sing at home, praise, worship, music together as a family on Sundays. Or then we changed to, she believed God was telling her to go back to a whole like a Jewish tradition. So we converted, in a way, our own family converted to more of a Messianic Judaism kind of thing. Internally, again, not associated with any kind of institution. And she directed me to, felt like God was telling me to change my name as a form of, and of course she made me change it to my stepdad's last name, which is exactly what she was trying to do with my sister when my sister was growing up with her, but she did it unofficially. She would just write her then ex-husband's last name, which is a different man, on pictures and things like that. So she made me do this officially, though. She made me take away my dad's last name because she despised my father, and anything tied to him, she made me get rid of, and made me wipe out. She couldn't stand that, and she had me take on my stepdad's last name, which I would have normally never done. But at that point, I was brainwashed. I was vulnerable. I was, and I own up to it now. I allowed that control over me because I was lost. I was, a scared, lost little girl who didn't know herself and didn't know how to find myself at the time. And I was looking for direction, and so I was giving people my power. And this just goes to show you, if you've been in this situation or if you're in this situation now, that's how it works. You have all of the power within you to form your reality, to create your reality, and to get yourself out of those situations. And those people are only allowed to get that control over you when you give them that control over you. You have the choice. And so you have to sometimes go through those toxic relationships to learn how to get your power back, how to take your power back, how to work through that trauma and release that hold from that wound within you that they're able to grab a hold of and manipulate and control you from. Because that's the only way that you're attracting them in your life, because you still have that wound and you're still giving your power away because you're not giving it to yourself by thoughts, actions, and deeds, and allowing certain people in your life to do certain things to you. That's how you take your power back, is you put up boundaries and you protect yourself and you remove yourself from toxic situations. And that's how you get your power back. But to go back to it, it got to such a very scary, toxic place where she was, I don't even know if I want to put this out there. It's so bizarre, and it's scary to me that this was allowed, because I would never stand for this at all, ever. It got to where there was animal sacrifices. She was having us do that, and I stood against it. And that's at that point, because I was bawling my eyes out because I knew it was wrong, and I knew it wasn't of God for sure at that point. And I prayed, God, get me out of here. She had cut me off of anybody I knew. She had me get rid of my old cell phone. I had no phone numbers. I couldn't remember people's numbers in Georgia. They wouldn't allow me to make friends. I had to work wherever my stepdad worked. He would make sure I wouldn't talk to anybody, so that I couldn't get a contact to get outside. So it was literally like a cult. And I felt scared and stuck and trapped. And I had given my power away. I didn't know what I was going through until after it was too late. And, what I had done and given all that power away. Again, I was trusting in my own mother to protect me and all that. And I shouldn't have done that. But I had to learn the lesson. So I prayed for a way out. And at that job, there was a man that was beginning to see the pattern. He had been through similar dynamics. He pulled me aside one day and was like, had a private conversation. He's like, is everything okay? Because I see your stepdad over here. He goes everywhere you go. You're saying he works on every job you work on. I was working day labor at the time in construction. And he would mandate, that was my mom's rule, that he goes on every work ticket that I go on so he can keep an eye on me, that I don't talk to men and act like a whore or whatever. And yes, that's actually literally what I was told. Just so you know, I'm not exaggerating there. And she made me feel like this big, like I couldn't do anything right on my own, and everything I did was judged. I would try to stay in my room most of the time. We weren't allowed TV and stuff in our room, or music or anything like that. It was just a very strict home, other than praise and worship music. I'll just say, like Christian music, and what she wanted, what she thought was okay, to sing from her past, that was allowed. TV was only allowed to be watched for news, and Tom Brokaw was the thing, and we only watched it when we were there together, like in the living room. That was it. So it was very little to do. I was bored out of my mind when I wasn't working, and when I was working with my stepdad, watching over me the whole time, and so I had no life. I had no freedom. And it was very difficult for me. I had to pray for a way out. And when that person at that den job, one of my managers, saw me and he saw what was going on, and he pulled me aside and I started explaining to him what was going on, he removed my stepdad from that ticket, and that blew up big time, as you can imagine. My stepdad was asking if I knew anything about it, if I knew why they dropped him, why did they do that, and I need to ask them, and he needs to try to get back out there to watch over me, and he's afraid that he's manipulating me, and blah, 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 which, I knew that that's what I had prayed for, was a way out of that situation. And I knew that that was the beginning of the end of that toxic situation, and it had, begun. So, but it was like everything that he did. The guy gave us free furniture, a new dining set. He's giving you gifts to try to win you over and get you in bed, blah, 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 was what I was told. But he didn't put any moves on me, anything like that. He was very respectful. But he was my way out of that relationship. That was what I prayed for, and that was the window I was given. I took it. Let's just say I took it and ran. It was just a few weeks later when, I had had enough, and because he had told me maybe 2 weeks before that, I want to let you know that he sat me down at lunch one day. He was like, look, it was about the time that he asked me what was going on. He said, look, I want to let you know that if you need a way out, I've seen this situation kind of happen before. You're in a very toxic relationship. You're in a cult, basically. If you need a way out, that's my dog having puppy dreams. He said, if you need a way out, I know somebody you can stay with that's safe, that won't abuse you or whatever. They'll give you a room. They have a free room available, or, I can help you out there as well. Just know that you have a place. And so I said, thank you. I will pray about it, and we'll see. Within like a few weeks, I called him up. One day I had enough of my mom accusing me, calling me whore, and stepdad, and they were coming down on me hard, and I just had enough. I had enough. And I called him up. I went outside and I called him up, and I was like, I'm ready. Can you find me a place tonight? Like, I'm getting out tonight. I can't do this anymore. And he said, yeah, sure. Let me make a phone call, and I'll call you right back. He made a phone call, called me right back a few minutes later. He said, we'll be there within the hour with a truck. And it was my other boss that was on that job that he was best friends with. They worked together as managers. And he said, we'll be there within the hour. Have all your stuff packed up outside, ready to go. So I began packing and told my mom what was going on. I'm leaving, whatever. She was trying to get in my face, trying to stand in my way of the doorway, and I had to push past her and get around her and put my stuff outside. And then she started pleading with me. It went from one thing to the next, the stages of the control of accusing me being mean and calling me names. And then she was like apologetic and, the whole stages of the narcissist. Because she was really a narcissist, and she was like, okay, I'm sorry, just stay here, and we need you, and blah, blah, blah. Well, she needed the money, is what she needed, and she wanted the control over me, and she literally lived out the life that she felt like she should choose through me, and I didn't realize that at the time. She was trying to make up for her wrongs in her life, and relive her life through me, and I was like, no, this is not going to happen. I'm done. I'm done being told that I committed adultery against God. I can never be remarried again. I can never have a kids. I can never do this. I have to live with them the rest of my life, was things that I was being told, that she was told by God, according to her, and she had gotten in visions, that, I was tainted, even though she was married and divorced 4 times. Yet it was not okay for me to be in divorce once, that, I committed adultery and I couldn't be with somebody else. I was like, that's wrong. I knew that was wrong in my gut. I was like, there's something wrong with this. It's not right. And that's when I started seeing through the light, like a few months. It's probably like close to a year before this came across where I was leaving. that's when I started figuring out, before the sacrifices started, that that's what was going on, and it was all about control. And I was like, okay, this is manipulation and control. I need to get out of here. I never experienced that before. So I, like, to that extent, and especially in my adult life, I needed to go through that. I needed to learn from that lesson of being fully codependent on somebody for my happiness. And I mean, I almost felt like this. I was scared to say and do anything. They would even go as far as to look at the mileage on the vehicle to see if I went straight to work and back and didn't go anywhere else. They would sometimes, ask me for my phone, and would make sure I'm not talking to anybody else. Like, it was 100% controlled, and it was a cult. And we were taught what to believe. We were taught how to worship, and then we were condemned if we went against it, and then we were kicked out, threatened to be kicked out with nothing, and no money, no car, no friends, and that's how we were controlled. And by the time I saw it for what it was too late, and I was completely isolated. And so when I got that opportunity, like I said, I jumped on it. And yes, I went into another, manipulative relationship from there, but at least I got out of the fire, the hottest fire and the worst of it. I started getting anxiety attacks from that. I had to get on Zoloft and Valium and Xanax because she would show up at my job sites, because my stepdad was still on day labor tickets with the labor company, and he knew he was asking to go out on tickets to those places, and he would ask if I'm out there, and they would tell him yes or no or whatever. Well, I moved to another job site, and because I traveled around to this company had several different projects going on at the same time, and I was working their construction punch, like to finish out the units. It's like a punch list you got to do, and so I had worked up my way up to where I was managing the punch crew. And so they would find out where I was at, what project was at. Then they would ask to go on a ticket to that project. And then my stepdad would go out there and find out where I was at. And then he would tell my mom, and then my mom would show up, like within a few days, because I wasn't answering her phone calls. I wouldn't answer. I would delete her voicemails. I wouldn't answer her phone calls. She showed up at my job site, started showing up. And then the first couple times she did, I went down and talked to her, because they would call me on the radio and say, hey, your mom's here and needs to talk to you really bad. So I come down, she just give me a letter, a huge wrapped up letter of pages and pages and pages of writing, condemning me basically. Saying, I love you in one breath, and then she'd turn around, condemn me, and call me a whore and say I need to repent. So yeah. And then she would say, okay, we need you to come back home. We're going to lose the house. So then that became a thing of guilt to put over my head. And then they did officially lose the house, and she showed up at my next job site to tell me that, and I wouldn't come down. But she called and left me a voicemail and let me know that, we lost the house, we're losing the house, we're getting foreclosed on because you and your brother defaulted on God and left us hanging and blah, blah, blah. Again, put all the guilt on me, pointing the finger at everybody else but themselves. And I'm like, I'm not accepting this. But then I started getting anxiety attacks because of it. And that's when I started going to a counselor and got on medication trying to control my anxiety attacks so I could at least function at work. And I went through this for years. And again, I never saw her after that physically, but every few years, she'd pop up. I started trying to rebuild that relationship with her. About the year I met my ex-husband. I started reconnecting with her, started taking her phone calls here and there. And then she started the cycle again. She found out where I worked. She started calling me at work when she knew I was working during the day, because I would not take her calls on my personal cell phone. And she would leave me back-to-back messages at work. And I had to call her and tell her, like, Mom, you're going to have to quit calling me at work. You cannot do that. I'm not going to do that. Like, I will block this number. I said, so quit calling me at work. You're going to cause me to lose my job, and I will be pissed. I will not talk to you anymore. And so then she quit doing that, and she just would call me voicemail over and over and over. And I finally, I got tired of it, because it was always condemning me and leaving all these long voicemails. And it was always her way or the highway. And, never about what I felt, never about what I needed or she didn't want to hear it. It was a one-way conversation. It was always her talking and us listening. She wouldn't allow us to get a word in otherwise. And I just got tired of it, and I told her I got fed up, and I said, I sent her an email in response to one of her long emails. And I said, Mom, I love you, but please stop. Please stop communicating with me. Please stop reaching out. I love you, but I can't do this anymore. And that's the last time I heard from her. And I found out 5 years later, it wasn't but a couple months later, she had died of some form of cancer at home. And, that was hard. I thank God to this day for my stepmom. My real mom always condemned my stepmom. She called her names too. Because she ended up marrying my dad right before my dad passed. And said she was just like him, blah, 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 demon possessed, blah, blah, blah. She would say all these things. And, but that woman was there for me. She was the one that was really there for me, supporting us, sometimes financially, through our hardships, helping us out, being as an ear for us, being there for us, as a mother figure as much as she could. To this day, she's still in our lives as a mother figure. And I thank God for that, for her. Because I don't know where I'd be without her in my life. I don't know that I would have made it this far without her and her support. So, anyway, I just thank God, for my stepmom. And she's at the point where her independence is kind of going away. And, I feel for her for that regard. I'm trying to be there for her now, like she's been there for me. And I just wanted to share my story that if somebody else has gone through a very similar situation of a very toxic relationship with your own mother or a mother figure in your life that like similar to this, where they were controlling, manipulative, even bipolar, that there's a way out. There's, and sometimes you got to make those hard decisions for yourself of choosing yourself in your own mental wellness, your emotional wellness, and your stability within yourself to feel safe by cutting them out of your life. And that was hard. I was always taught and raised that, family's important, family's everything. And you need to always, no matter what's going on with you and your family, you need to always forgive and let it go. And that's what we tried to do as kids. But it became so toxic to where we couldn't do that anymore in our family with her. It was affecting us mentally, emotionally, physically, and it was causing further trauma because she was choosing not to change. She was choosing not to look at herself as the issue and was pointing the finger at everybody else. And we had to choose ourselves and choose to love ourselves more by cutting her out of our lives. And that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made because she was our only living parent. We didn't have aunts and uncles other than my dad's sister. And, at the time she wasn't really involved much in my life. She tried to be, she would write us letters. She would send us birthday cards every year, which I'm so very thankful for. She'd try to call me when she got my number, every once in a while and check on me, check on my brother and sister. But, we only had one sibling. My mom had a half brother she didn't keep in touch with for many, many years. I don't even know his last name. I only know his first name. They don't know anything about that side of the family anymore. We're not in any contact with them. We're still only in contact with my dad's family, my cousins and stuff now, because my aunt's now passed. And their children, a couple of their children. So it's really difficult because we had a smaller family. And, some people are just raised that way. You're raised that family's everything. You need to try to keep them in your life. But there's times that what I've learned that you just can't do that. you've got to love yourself first. And you have to sometimes make that tough choice of, if they're choosing not to do the work on themselves, to keep the relationship in their life with you because of their toxic patterns, you have to make that choice for yourself. If you've brought it to their attention and they continue to refuse to do the work, you have to then choose self-love to remove that person out of your life and put up boundaries. And don't feel guilty about it. That's hard, not feeling guilty about it, especially the way that we're raised and programmed to believe that you got to keep family in your life and blah, blah, blah. If it comes to that point, you got to choose yourself. You got to choose self-love. That's what God doesn't want you to be in a toxic relationship, continually traumatizing yourself, allowing that just because it's family. Just because it's blood doesn't mean that you need to keep somebody that continues to be toxic and not work on themselves. Even though you've raised it to their awareness, you brought it up to them, you told them how it makes you feel and how you cannot continue to allow them to do that because it hurts you XYZ ways. You got to love yourself more. And God would not want you to be hurt, allowing that hurt to yourself over and over and over, just to keep that person in your life because they're related by blood to you. You got to choose self-love above all else with anybody in your life. Choose self-love. That's what the main thing is I want to get across to people. And so I'm right here at an hour. Sorry I was so long-winded, but I felt like I needed to get all this out for a reason. I really hope this helps some people out there. If you're going through a similar situation with your mother, a toxic mother, know that you're not alone. Just choose yourself. Choose self-love. I'm going to leave that with you. And until next time, I'll leave you in love and light. Take care.
This moment is mine, can't no one take it from me. What I feel, who I am, unconditionally. I've left all of my fears and my tears on the ground.